All right, sounds great. So it is very true that MongoDB is a different beast from relational databases. Don't get me wrong, I grew up with relational databases, and I spent 19 years with a Microsoft SQL Server, uh, mostly as a developer. But then I realized that my applications built for the web could have used a different um, database. And that's when I started looking for databases. And there were many options even back in 2014. In fact, they're pretty much the same options you find today. And what I uh, ultimately made me decide for MongoDB is seemed to be the one with the best trajectory going forward, most popularity, but also they had the free MongoDB University and all those classes. And so I started taking those because it wouldn't cost me anything. All I had to do was wake up early in the morning, take some extra time focused on learning, and I learned it all. Eventually, I got certified both as a DA and as a developer. So that is what I hope that you guys will also feel like doing. So I got my content here for aggregation. So I will get started and share my screen. Welcome everybody, and let's start learning MongoDB. Please interrupt me at any time with a question. As you said, my name is Daniel. Any questions, Graziani or Daniele? And here is aggregation basics, pipeline stages. Let me make this bigger. Can you read?
Yes.
Okay, good. So aggregation takes your documents in a collection and transforms. So it's a series of stages that you can line up as a pipeline. Now, the concept of a pipeline is very common in Unix. You may be familiar with the idea that you have an input, then you have a process, and then you have an output. In MongoDB, the input is your documents. The pipeline stage is the transformation that you apply to those documents. And then the output is the documents that result after after your processing. So the stages can be complicated or can be very simple. We start out usually describing the very simple match stage, which you see here is the first stage that we discuss. In this example, we have a restaurants collection. So let's assume that it has documents in it, and we're going to aggregate. Aggregate is the keyword for the aggregation pipeline. So you can do aggregate as a method on any collection. Inside the parentheses, you have a square bracket. Here is a square bracket because you have an array of stages. So the pipeline doesn't have just one processing. The idea of a pipeline is that you will have multiple stages. However, nothing stops you from having a single stage. So let me see if I have this database started on a terminal on my screen. No, actually, I have absolutely no um, terminals open because I just recently installed updates. Updates will destroy any work that you've previously done to prepare. So let me make this small and then Control Shift plus. Let's make it bigger so everybody can see. Let's make the window bigger. All right, then we need to do a few things here. We need to see if we have any, these are, okay. All right, so we're gonna do MongoDB replica set Wex. Let's see if that works. All right. The problem is that it's a replica set, so I need to actually start 3 nodes. Who is familiar with replication? Nobody? Come on, guys, this is for 100 points. Nobody wants 100 points. They're worth a lot. They will let you out of the class at the end of the session, because otherwise you can't get out without a get out of jail free card. All right, so if you can see the screen, I'm starting a second MongoDB process, this one on a different port, 27018, so that, oh, didn't like it. What was wrong with that? Let's find out if I already have some processes running. Chef grep MongoDB. And no, we don't. We only have this one that I started. How come that one doesn't have port? Oh, because it used the default. So this should work. Zero, 1, 8. So, oh, but it's trying to use data/db. Okay, let me take a look. All right, let's see what we got here. We have nothing. cd documents. Okay, so here I have a bunch of data. This is where it is. Okay. Shutting down again. So I need to pass a DB path. Okay. And now it's looking for 27019, which will be the third one. It's always easier to start with a standalone, but I like to make things difficult for myself. So let's make this window bigger. Oh, I need to specify a different DB path. I think I have RS1. No. Okay. Now, yes, we have RS1. Okay. So from here, should be able to do this. And now we have 3 MongoDBs, right? Yep. And it just keeps on. Okay, we don't have to stay here. Mongo. So we're connected. Okay. All right, show DBs. There's my local databases. So admin, config, and local are standard databases that come with a replicated database. The default database when you connect MongoDB through the Mongo shell is test. And so here we're connected to MongoDB, to that replica set, inside of which is a test database. Let's do show tables. Does tables work with MongoDB? You probably don't know. And now you know. It does work. We don't have a restaurants table here. So that example that I copied is not going to work. Well, that's too bad. So let's do db.restaurants.aggregate, and we'll change the collection to students and something that students actually have. db.students. Now find. We got just some test data here. Okay, grades, grade, okay. So db dot students dot aggregate. As I said, the aggregation framework revolves around this keyword, aggregate, which you can apply to any collections in the database. So here I'm using the test database, the students collection, I'm aggregating it. And what was the first thing that we saw inside the parentheses? It was a square bracket, because a square bracket represents an array of stages. The first stage we're going to work on, which we have to pass as a document. I don't know if you're familiar that MongoDB is a document database. Pretty much everything we pass around as parameters is a document. So we start out with $match, which is the name of the aggregation stage that is similar to the find command in the cursor. So we can pretty much use the same syntax as we do in find. So we can do colon. And then what do we want to find? Let's say grades. Dot grade 101. Grades dot grade 101. So will this work? Of course. I put it together. There is a lot of grades 101. I didn't see that. This is a bunch of overachieving students. Let me see if I can find some less popular votes. Grades, 80. Okay, that returns just a couple of students. Any questions about how to use $match? You pass a filter and it finds the matching documents. Okay, so let's take a look at show collections. Let me see if I can do something that you have never seen before, but that in MongoDB, but that you commonly do in SQL Server probably. And I have a prime collection here, db.prime.find. What does this prime collection store? Just a bunch of numbers, the highest of which is 111. So let me remove the prime. How do you remove multiple documents? Delete many. This is the syntax. You may have learned some other syntax, but this is the current syntax. And where x is less than, I like to put everything in quotes, less than 100. And why am I doing that? Well, you will see in a second. First of all, this is a good refresher of CRUD command. You issue the command and it tells you how many matched, so how many got deleted. And now the lowest number for X is 101. And that also happens to be a grade that we had seen. So what if you have the crazy requirement where you want to find all students where that got the grade that is equal to the lowest number of X in the prime collection. So we're talking two different collections, values completely unrelated. Oh my goodness, I'm panicking because MongoDB, doesn't like to do lookups and so on. So you talk to me, I tell you, easy. You just do a subquery. Now, how do you do a subquery? Well, first you need to figure out how to return just 101. So let's give this a shot. If we do db.prime.find, how do we get the minimum value? Well, actually, I need to go take a look at the documentation because things are always a little bit different from what you expect. So let's find MongoDB, dollar minimum. It says aggregation, but I want to use find. Well, maybe I'll use aggregation. It's dollar minimum and the expression. Okay, so expression would be dollar minimum, the field name. Oh, so the expression would be a list of Yeah. Okay, so I need to use aggregation there too. Fine. Gate dollar match. So this will be minimum number, minimum dollar dollar X. Then we need to close this, close this. Okay. Unknown operator. Well, so bad value. It seems that this should be a lot easier, huh? Okay, minimum quantity. Oh, so it actually requires a project, a group stage. All right. Thank you. Well, then we're going to talk about group. Group has two sections. As you see here, inside group, there is underscore ID, and we're going to pass null because we're going to group over all the documents, and then fields that you define. So we're going to define minimum number we have there, but we're also going to define underscore ID like this. All right, let's see if this works. And it does work. That's great. But if we pass this whole document to the other query, it doesn't mean anything. So we need to output just 101. How do we do that? Well, let's see. What if we do $0 and then min number? That work. Okay. We need to say to array wow. Let's try to remove all this. That didn't work. So let's go back. We have this. We need to grab minimum number. I need to come up with the shortest way to turn that into just a number. I thought that toArray would work. All right. toArray, well, without the dot. Now we're back there, and now we can do minimum number. And now we have just 101. So, long story, now we're gonna get to the end of it. long story long, unfortunately, because it took a while to get to this, but you got to learn a little bit about what you can do with MongoDB. Let's go back to db.students.find. We had grades.grade, and now we put in this whole thing, and then we close, and we close. Now, who has seen this syntax before? Let me go back to Zoom. Do we still have students? Nobody's dropped out of the call. Well, that's pretty amazing. In fact, we even have new people. Welcome. You have seen me go through a lengthy process of extracting just a number from a collection and then passing that number to uh, another query and essentially have a subquery. So this is your regular query from here to here, and then from here to here, the parentheses. This is a subquery. I am pretty sure that you have not seen the use of subqueries in MongoDB. So you came to this meetup today and you got to see. Let me see, there is a chat message that I didn't notice. So there is a yes, 121. Oh, that was a long time ago. Thank you, Eric. Any questions? No questions. So now you can go and do subqueries all over the place. This is something that most people, even inside MongoDB, are not aware of. You have to really play around with things. And I keep this as a discussion piece for people that use other technologies so that perhaps they're used to writing queries with subqueries. Lo and behold, that is supported by MongoDB as well. Let me go back. Let's see, is it here? It's here. So actually, I'm getting ready to talk about the aggregation framework with a customer tomorrow. So this is a traditional example. So what you see here, b.orders.aggregate. That's over here where my mouse is. I'm moving my mouse. So aggregate is the keyword that you can put on any collection to begin a manipulation process. The manipulation process is called aggregation, and the method is called aggregate. In this situation, there are four very simplified documents: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Documents have 3 fields inside: customer ID, amount, and status. So what is the first manipulation? Is this match? We only want documents where status is A. We see here that the first document has status A. The second one also, and so is the third one. But the fourth one is status D. So if we do match for status A, we end up from 4 documents, which are our input, to 3 documents, which are our output. The output becomes the input for the next stage. And that is a good example of a pipeline. Any questions? So I'm not used to getting questions, especially during a meetup. People are typically questionless. However, please don't be afraid to ask a question if anything is not clear, because I would like to walk away having given you an introduction of how to use aggregation. So after the first stage, match status A, we have three documents coming out. Those are the input documents for your next stage. In the next stage, we decide to group information and calculate a total. We calculate this total by summing the values of amount. Notice how the amount field is referenced with a dollar sign. If you want to get to a field that already exists in the input document, you can reference it with dollar amount. Dollar sum, without the quotes around it, is an operator. It, it doesn't matter that it doesn't have quotes around it. It could have had quotes around it. It's the position that makes it an operator. So you're summing the values found inside amount. Amount has 500, 250, and 200. Total will be grouping by customer ID. The values of customer ID are going to be unique, and that's why we use underscore ID as the field name for the grouping fields. You can group by multiple fields, just like in SQL Server or MySQL, Oracle, etc. To pass multiple fields to ID, you will create a subdocument, and then you would have the field names. You could even change customer ID. You don't have to preserve it. So you could call that field name customer, and then the value would have to be the values that you want to group by. So it would have to be quotes, dollar, customer, underscore, sorry, cust, underscore ID, just like you see it there. That part has to match your inbound documents. So a group is not as simple as match. There are these two completely separate parts. The part where you specify the group fields, which are inside underscore ID, and parts where you get to define the field names. You're not restricted to underscore ID. In fact, you pass field names that don't interfere with underscore ID. You can choose a field then underscore ID. In this example, we chose total because that makes sense. It does a summation of the values found in the amount field. So given that we're grouping by customer ID, here we have two customer IDs that are, we add 250 to 500, and we come up with 750. Here for customer ID B212, there's only one value. So the summation of 200 is really just a value of 200. Notice that status is lost. We could have preserved it. We would have had to add status and then reference dollar status here somewhere. After, maybe right here where my mouse is, we would have done comma status colon quotes dollar status inside, and it would have preserved these values, status A, and it would have given you three fields here. So this is again a more complicated group stage. Are there any questions?
Daniel, if the group dollar group appears in the aggregate function, it would appear as the last line, right? Always.
No, it can be okay. It can be the first line if you wanted to. Except, is it a good idea to use it as a first line? No. Why? Group completely modifies your schema, right? You go from this schema right here to that one over there. This and that are completely different animals. So match can use indexes. If there is an index on status, this match can use the index on status. So it will be efficient. If you swap the two things around, like if you do group like this and then match for status A, you will come out with the same results, but it will not be as efficient because after you have modified the documents and the documents have a different shape, doing a match will not um, be able to use an index. And
Right.
so an
Yeah.
index is quite a bit slower.
Right. Similar to stored procs in the Oracle relational
Yes,
world. Is there anything similar
right.
in the NoSQL Mongo world?
So I don't know other NoSQL databases, to be honest. I've used Couchbase, but I don't remember how they do um, aggregations like this. But I'm sure they have a way to do it. So how
Yeah,
do this?
Couch, hey, this Raj. Couchbase actually has a nickel query. It's very similar to SQL. And for people who work with SQL databases, much easier for them to actually use it. So it's called N. It's pronounced nickel, but N1QL is is that query language.
Yes, that's right. Um, Thank you, Raj. That was really helpful. It was it Raj talking?
Yeah, this is Raj. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I was late and
Hey,
I
that's
had
fine.
something
You
else.
still get 100 points though for the
Yeah.
comment.
No, you can take some cut. That's no problem.
Okay, you get 70 points. Wow,
That's fine.
this is
That's fine. Take
this is
some
the
more.
first time. No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. You're making it sound like they're worthless, but they're not. I mean, okay, let's go back to this. We asked about the difference between MongoDB and the relational world and whether this grouping is um, is similar to a group by clause, essentially, and it is. And there is, some nuances that make this a little bit different. Like you can easily create new fields, or the results can then be output to a new collection. And you notice that underscore ID is unique, right? There's two values there that are different. So underscore ID as a field has to be unique in MongoDB. And so this output is designed so that you can export it to another collection. Or maybe you can use it for a view. That would also be a good use case. So,
How is the performance in comparison to the relational databases? You know,
well, uh, there is a little bit of a trickery here that MongoDB can do because when you do updates, you can also do a summation. So you can pre-calculate your totals or your sums. And so, for example, if here you have amount, you can also add another field called, um, well, you wouldn't do it at this level, at the document level, but you would do it in a bucketing pattern where you have all documents with ID of A123, and you calculate as you go through. You have these documents, or these documents in an array, but then the document outside of the array has the calculated summation of all the values of 500. So if you do something like that, then when you have to calculate the grand total, you only have to sum values that are already pre-aggregated. So 750 and 200, as opposed to going through and getting all the individual values. So in that case, it could be better performance. Uh, Otherwise, the performance of grouping is similar. In some cases, it's better for a relational databases. It depends on how your schema is designed. And when it comes to MongoDB performance, I always say it's not so much about the performance of MongoDB. It's about how you design your application so that your schema matches your application, so that when your application wants to perform some calculations, the data is already either in that format and all they have to do is query it, or do some simple grouping as opposed to some more complicated operations. And that, avoiding lookups and so on, is what can really give some performance benefits um, that make the MongoDB platform a platform of choice. Did that answer your question, Abe?
That's wonderful. Thank you. I have one other question.
You have another question?
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah, I want questions because otherwise.
So, so pardon, I mean, I don't work in data all the time, but I would like to know for me and for my team. So how painful or easy it is to transition from relational persistence to NoSQL? And are there any tools, any latest ones that make life easier that are out there?
So I'll give you an honest answer. It's easy to jump into MongoDB, as in creating a database, adding documents. There is not much to it. But knowing the ins and outs that are going to make the database perform, or that are going to correctly, uh, for example, do an aggregation query, they require a little bit of study and work. There is definitely documentation online, which is good. There is also education classes that I strongly recommended. I think CL pasted a link for the EDU uh, university at mongodb.com. Those are invaluable. As far as tools, yes, I mean, there are tools like Compass is a good tool for manipulating your data, for creating pipelines and so on. But there is no secret formula or sauce that you can use to do things right. That still comes with experience and with learning. So if you have a team and you have a budget, I would recommend a training. And we do have public training now where you can buy just one seat. So you don't have to get, 10 or 12 people to join training. You can just buy one seat and join a public training, and then it will also be limited to 12 people. So, but it could also be just 3 or 4 people. And
Hey, Daniel,
yep,
can I comment on this one?
yeah.
Hey, Abhay, I think the question for you is why are you changing from relational to a document oriented? I think that'll be a bigger question. And then I mean, tooling just to import data, that's probably much smaller. Your whole logic of the application is going to change based on which database you change. I mean, Mongo it has its own pros and cons, And if you want slow transition, or like, there's a parallel to SQL, it's a competing product, but Couchbase is, I'm not working for either one of them, but I've used it, and you take a look at both of them. But the bigger question again is, why are you doing that? I mean, some things are more appropriate for relational, and others are better for using document database.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Raj, again. So,
Yeah, thank you.
except, obviously, coming from me, MongoDB is the best choice of any choice you can make.
Absolutely.
But that is just my point of view. So let me go away from this example and back to here. All right, so we talked about match, we talked about group. And then here I have match and group together. All right, we have seen match and group. But in general, expressions can include field paths, literals, system variables, expression objects, expression operators, and they can be nested. So that didn't make any sense, right? You read that and you're like, huh? All right, let's talk about arithmetic expressions. You can multiply your values. You can do some rounding. You can create the square root. You can do array operations, such as finding a particular element in your array with array lm at, or first, or in. You can do Boolean comparisons. Definitely, there is a lot. And we are currently working on strengthening all our date capabilities so you can do better comparisons. So last time we got together, we talked about um, we talked about data types and their importance. So it is very important that you store your dates, for example, as date data type. So you create the values with new date, and then you pass the value that you want. And then you will be able to do aggregation with queries with date comparisons. Well, we have 13 now. Oh, thank you. There is another link from CL with NoSQL advantages. So here we have a couple of collections, and then we look up. So let's talk about $lookup. It's an aggregation stage, and it has four values that you need to provide. From is the collection. So if you're building the aggregate on order, it means that you already have the orders collection. So you're doing a join between orders and the from collection. So the keyword from may be a little bit confusing because you may think of from as the original collection. So from is the foreign table, okay, the foreign collection. The local field, that is for orders. So item is found here in the orders collection. Foreign field, SKU, is the same thing as item, right? But in the other collection has a different name. So you're joining item here with SKU, and this is how you define them. The local field in orders is local field, and the foreign field in inventory is SKU. And then this is the easiest. You don't have to put much thought into this one. As it's a name for the resulting array. So what you end up with is a collection that has all your uh, order fields, ID, item, price, quantity, and then inventory docs, which is um, all your related data from the inventory collection. Notice that this inventory docs matches this as from the lookup definition. Could have been anything else, right? But it could be inventory information. Again, you matched on SKU. So this matches item. And then the rest of the information is the information that you didn't have. And maybe what you were after was the number of units in stock. So now you have the number of units in stock for all of them, but except for this one, which has an incomplete description. This was a document. Yeah, this one. So null actually matches this ID3 because SKU is null here and item is missing here. A missing field has a value of null for comparison reasons. So that's why you end up with these three documents. I would like to know if there are any questions on the use of lookup as an operator, as a stage. So we saw that we used lookup to find all the fields in the foreign collections. With a subquery, you can achieve something similar, but really, dollar lookup is a more efficient way of doing joins than looking up data directly using JavaScript syntax like I did earlier. So I would recommend doing joins whenever you have the opportunity. Remember though that joins, just like in SQL, they are not well performant. So um, you you may choose um, not to do joins. Embed the foreign collection into the, for example, you could embed inventory data into orders. Now, that is a very poor schema choice because the two collections really have nothing in common. Um, they need to be two separate collections. Any questions about everything I've said so far?
So Daniel, the syntax that you are showing,
Yeah.
and pardon my unknowledge regarding this, but
No.
the syntax is MongoDB specific, right? Is this a
Yes.
standardized? Okay.
Yeah. This is MongoDB specific. So there are. This is consistent with our syntax. So we talked about how to do an aggregation. You put the aggregate method on the collection that you want to aggregate. Then inside the square bracket, you define a document with your stage. And it starts out with your stage name, which in this case is $lookup. In the previous example, it was $match. There was also $group. There is all kinds of matches. And here in these notes that I've put together, I have uh, some other methods that are fairly easy to understand and to show, like the $out stage is pretty simple. It's $out and then a collection name. And what does that do? It creates or replaces a collection called authors in this case, and it just provides all the documents the way they're defined in the previous stage. So in the previous stage, we have an underscore E with the author value, and then a list of an array of books with all their titles. So this authors collection that will be created or replaced as a result of running this aggregation will just have two fields, no more, no less, underscore ID and books.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So I just have one small question. When do we use JavaScript and when we do not use? What are the recommendations?
Okay, so JavaScript is something that you can use even inside inside your queries. For example, there is $where, and $where is something that lets you get data out of JavaScript variables or of documents that you have returned so far. The recommendation is not to use JavaScript unless you have no other way of doing things. The um, the reason is it doesn't perform as well as our native language,
Right.
MQL. The um,
But
we
the,
just introduced in 4.4 accumulators, which let you calculate data on your documents using JavaScript syntax. All that can be turned off in a parameter when you start MongoDB, and you can say, do not even allow JavaScript, because some companies think that JavaScript may be used against the database as a security point of view.
right. Well, I would imagine using JavaScript will increase the readability of these things, right?
The readability,
Yeah.
actually, yes, it is more readable to read JavaScript than the syntax that we use. Um, the syntax is something that you build a little by little. And I'm going to do an example now. We have 15 minutes left. And let's see if I have that example here.
I'm sorry for all these
No, no,
questions.
no. Questions, really, we're covering what we wanted to talk about today. And we we did that. I'm looking for this example. I think it's all the way at the end.
Daniel likes to answer your questions, Abe. By the way, Daniel, Abe was at a previous MongoDB session as well, prior to yours, a gentleman named Praveen. So he is a frequent customer.
Great. Welcome back. So here is my isPrime example. Uh, Here I use $project, $add fields, $range, $map, $reduce. Those are all stages that are supported in MongoDB. Clearly, it's a mouthful, meaning if you are not familiar with MongoDB, oh my goodness, there is a lot to learn here. So let's try to do it though. That way you have even more familiarity than before you join the class or the, the event. So here I talk about how do we find out if the numbers in X are prime or not. And so I created a pipeline that tells me exactly that. And it does that in 4 stages. First, we come up with a list of divisors that we're going to uh, divide those numbers into. Then we add the number 2 to the array of divisors because those numbers were a range that started with 3. we're gonna look into that, but I'm just going over all the stages. Then we calculate the remainders. And we use the map function to do these calculations on all the element in the array. So we calculate the remainder for every divisor. And then we find out if there is zero values. If there is zero values, means that there were no remainders for that divisor. So that means that this is not a prime number. So if it is not a prime number, it we're going to return no, false. If it was a prime number, we're going to return yes. Given that we don't have a lot of time, I am going to demonstrate this by running it quickly. So I already have prime. So db.prime.find. I deleted some values, but I still have 101, 103, 102, 109, and 111 twice. Okay, so then we can do create divisors. Let's do this. All right, so we've created that project stage. And now if I do db.prime.aggregate, and I pass create divide like this, it will calculate that list of divisors. So take note that $range creates a range of values, and so it creates that divisors field, as you see here. It starts with the number 3. As you see here, we start with 3. And then it stops with the square root of x. So for 101, it would stop with the rounded value of probably 10, right? So then it adds, starting at 3, ending at 10, and skipping every second one. So 3, 5, 7, and 9. Given that those numbers are all similar, this list of divisors is the same. If we had 331, then we would have had a value of x with a lot more divisors. Again, stop me with questions. I'm trying to rush against the clock here. Now I'm going to add another stage. Yeah, remember my choice. Add divisor 2. So we're using concat arrays. We already have a divisors array, right? This is indisputably an array. And now we add an array with just a value 2. Simple. But we need to do that because we need to also test if the number is divisible by 2. Otherwise, it's going to tell us that 102 is prime, and that will be wrong. Well, 102 is also divisible by 3, but you get what I mean. So now we get to try this aggregate, but we add So now we get the same output, but we also have the number 2. Now the interesting stuff starts to happen. Let's go back here and let's calculate these remainders. Again, let's declare a variable. Let's take a look at what we just did. Calculate remainders. Here, a little bit more complex. Project is the field that chooses what to carry over to the next stage. We're carrying over X and divisors, and we're adding another calculated field, calculated remainder, where we are using $map on divisor. And for each value inside divisor, we're going to do mod and pass these 2 values, the X and field, the array, essentially. So the value in the array and the array of divisors. How is this going to play out? Let's take a look. Oh, wait. I think I might have a mistake here. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, but I think I needed that S. Well, let's give it a shot. Undefined variable, yeah. So I need to go back. It was correct the way it was. So why did it not take it? Okay, that looks correct now. Oh, finally. All right, so now we have divisors and calculated remainders. So a good student pointed out that all we have to do now is find out if 0 is found in the index here. And we don't have to do this very complicated thing. The formula is index of array. Would be a much quicker solution, but I wanted to demonstrate the use of $reduce, so I did all this. Given that we have 3 minutes left, I am just going to go with this. And I will let you guys at home, as you practice this, determine whether you want to test the other solution. So with this, we now have whether or not number is prime or not. So we have true, true, false. 102 is definitely false. And 111 is false because it's divisible by 3. So thank you very much. I mean, we need to sit here. I would ask any questions, but there really isn't any time other than greetings. I hand it back to you, CL. Can you take over now?
Daniel, thank you very much.
You're
Another
welcome.
big-hearted, smart, compelling presentation. I love it. You outdid yourself for the first one. We had a great question from Germany. Germany says, do we have a Slack channel that we can collaborate on? Awesome question. Do we have such a thing, Daniel?
Yes. So MongoDB has a community Slack channel. They might have closed the Slack channel, but there is definitely a MongoDB community that you can join. Let me take a look on my personal PC and see if that channel is still going, because I haven't been in it in a while. But if it has been closed, it's only because it has been replaced with something else. But Slack is definitely something that is very common and very useful. So just give me a moment while my computer logs into the network. Okay. MongoDB community. Yep. Okay. Announcements hasn't been used in a while. Okay, they moved to community.mongodb.com. Please start. Okay, so we use a community forum. So let me put this in the chat. developer.mongodb.com/community/forums. I wonder why. Looking for the chat. My next meeting is popping up. So it is developer.mongodb.com/community/forums. Let's see if this works. What? It didn't turn into a link. Let me try it. There you go. So maybe they have feature in these forms that they couldn't get out of. Okay, so there was a question, would be interesting to know my views and opinions regarding MongoDB's lead in the market so far. I think it's well placed. I can't speak any further. So thank you very much for coming. We'll see you next time. There is a third session that we are going to do. And please come back. Bye. I'm going to stop
All right.
sharing.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.